It's time for another Dice Tower review from Gamers Remorse.
Hello and welcome back to Gamers Remorse. Today we're taking a look at Legacy TCG. That's Legacy, the card game. Check them out at legacytcg.com.
Legacy the Card Game is a game by Legacy LLC for 2 players and takes about 30 minutes to an hour to play. Both players take on the role of a hero, wielding their own special powers, commanding minions, and fighting for dominance over each other. In this instance, Brian will be playing Vam the Warrior, and Eric will be playing Ayun the Necromancer. There is a very detailed backstory to each of these heroes and many others at legacytcg.com that I will not cover here. In fact, there's a lot about this game that I won't cover here because this is one of those rare games that takes years to master. In fact, there's a bit of a learning curve here, so if you find yourself lost in the playthrough, that is totally understandable. I recommend going to legacytcg.com and reading more. In this game, each player takes a deck of cards. In that deck of cards are creatures under your control, your hero, magical or powerful items, events, and spells. Each player is able to use their deck to their will in order to achieve one of 2 goals, either reduce the player's points from 1200 to 0, or to make the other player run out of cards. In either case, a player with points and cards to draw at the end of the game wins. Each player then takes turns playing their cards down onto the battlefield. Each turn, each player plays a maximum of 1 creature, but can play multiple spells or items to the battlefield. The battlefield is represented by 2 rows of 7 columns. The top row includes 5 middle columns to be used for attacking the other player. To either side of these 5 middle rows are the graveyard, where discards go, and the realm, where continuing events are placed. In the bottom row, again, is 7 columns. The middle 5 are used to equip spells or items to your minions in the top row. In the far right is the draw pile, where new cards are drawn into your hand, and the bottom left is the void deck. The void deck contains cards that are so powerful that they cannot remain in the game for long. In fact, you need to sacrifice your own minions in order to obtain these special items. Now let's take a closer look at the cards. The cards themselves resemble other deck builder games, but there are a couple of things that we should highlight. Like some other deck builders, the attack and defense are written on the lower right. In this instance of the Ancient Rune Mage, the attack strength is a 20 and the defense is 50. However, the minions are also defend and attack if in the attack position, with their attack strength. That is to say, unless a player has specifically aligned the card to be in defense only mode by turning it sideways, then the cards themselves will not use their defense point value. While discussing attack versus defense, it is important to note that the attack stance allows a card to completely block an attack, even if vanquished from the field, whereas in an attack mode, the remainder goes against the master's total points. On the top is the name, Ancient Rune Mage. Above the title is the secondary mechanic of the game, Line of Sight. The small arrow shows the Ancient Rune Mage can only attack directly adjacent. In the example of the Skeleton Hunter, he can only attack diagonal cards. The lower left shows how many void points are earned if this card is sacrificed. There are many other caveats to this game, but I'm attempting to balance a fine line between a brief overview and details that will only confuse you without giving you the hour tutorial. That's not to say that this game is overly complicated, only that in order to do it justice, the rules would take some time to fully relay in this medium. So, with that said, let's have a quick playthrough of Legacy, the card game. For this game, Brian is the first player. The first player starts by drawing 6 cards and playing a single creature to attack. The first creature to attack does not land damage on the opponent. Brian plays the Ancient Rune Mage with a 20 attack and 50 defense. Eric, the second player, then draws 5 cards and chooses a card to play to respond. He plays Reverick the Vampire with 60 attack and 90 defense. He plays it against Brian's Rune Mage, who dies. And Brian takes 10 points damage since Eric's attack is 60 minus Brian's attack of 50. The remainder is 10. The remaining attack strength after card negations always goes against the player's points. Brian plays Dragonkin Initiate, which allows him to sacrifice the card in order to deal 80 damage against your opponent. In addition, it allows a player to search his deck and special summon, or draw a card from your deck, rather than your hand, for a Dragonkin card, and play it immediately. This would indicate Brian is hoping to do massive amounts of damage to Eric at the cost of going through cards faster than ideal. Brian plays another Dragonkin Initiate card, hitting Eric for 60 damage. Brian retaliates by responding with the Bear Trap, negating Eric's attack and forcing Eric to keep his vampire in place. The Ancient Rune Mage continues to deal no damage to Eric. In response, Eric plays the Zodge Cultist, who attacks for 20 and defends with 50. He plays it against the Dragonkin Initiate, who defends the attack. Brian responds by sacrificing the Dragonkin Initiate, who breathes fire damage for 80 and special summons another Dragonkin Initiate card from his deck. Brian then attacks with a Berserk Minotaur for 70 against the Cultist, who defends with 20, resulting in the loss of the Cultist and a total of 70 minus 20 plus 60 equaling 110 damage from Eric's points. But the Cultist has a special ability that when he dies, he allows for reincarnation, where Eric may search his deck to special summon any undead card. Eric plays the White Wraith, which has a value of 0 to attack, but when it dies, it can either heal yourself for 100 or deal 100 or 200 damage, dependent upon whether it's day or night. Eric responds by playing his hero level 1, Ioun the Damned. He attacks for 90 and has 2 special abilities: Summon Skeleton, which allows you to special summon an undead type card from the deck once per turn. This is in addition to a regular summon. Ioun also allows you to empower the undead, which adds plus 20 attack to all undead minions. Eric attacks with 90 from Ioun, since it is the only creature he has on the field other than the vampire that remains in a bear trap. Since it is now night, the Minotaur changes teams and Eric plays him defensively in front of the Dragonkin Initiate. Brian plays Sacrificial Altar, which allows all players to double their void points when sacrificing minions. Brian sacrifices the Dragonkin Initiate, which allows him to do 80 damage to Eric and special summon an Ancient Rune Mage. Brian plays a Skeleton Hunter. Between the Skeleton Hunter, who attacks for 65 to the corners, an Ancient Rune Mage, who can attack for 20 direct, so instead, Brian repositions to attack Eric himself for 85 damage. At this point, Brian has been using a chain of high-damage sacrificial attacks with the Dragonkin. He has been draining Eric's point total, but it is coming at the cost of his deck. Remember, if he runs out of cards before Eric, or if he runs out of cards before Eric is down to 0 points, he will lose the game. Conversely, Eric is attempting to get as many creatures out on the field at one time as possible, thus allowing him to perform a larger team attack across the board for a longer period of time. Having played both sides, I can say that both teams were using their strengths. The Vom deck, played by Brian, has a higher attack score, but appears to lack as many creatures or minions than the Ioun deck has. Ioun has strengths in numbers, as you would suspect of a Necromancer deck. Ultimately, the game was won by Brian, who was able to double down on attacks using a similar method of chaining Dragonkin, but also by upgrading his more powerful creatures with powerful items and spells. Eric, however, attempted to gain as many creatures on his front line as possible to have a continuous wave of minions doing damage. However, Brian was able to circumvent this by taking out Eric's hero twice, and by disabling some of his attack strategies.
This has been Legacy, the card game. So with no further ado, let's jump into our rubrics. Sean, would you like to start?
Sure. So this was actually filmed Brian and Eric playing, but I had played it a number of times before. I will say that there is a larger learning curve to this game than I think we had anticipated. I will say that once you understand the rules, there's a lot of depth to this game. There's a lot of ability to use one card to really unlock the abilities of another card, which is really cool to see. Through my rubric, quality of components is 0 to 2. I'm giving it a 1.5. The artwork is very good. The mats are extremely nice. The little iconography is really cool. I mean, there's some great artists on here that did a lot of work. John Silva, Satanasov. A good balance of skill deluxe. 0 to 1, I'm giving that a 1. once I got into it and finally understood how it all worked, I think things locked into place nicely, and I could tell that a lot of work had been done to make sure that each of those components work together. I will say there needs to be maybe a little bit more balancing between the two different decks. But that could just be, it's easier to play Vom, as a new player, whereas Ayun, or whatever the necromancer's name is, it seemed like there was a lot more finesse there that needed to be mastered. I'd like to play this a few more times just with the necro character to really try and unlock those abilities. Analysis paralysis 0 to 1. I give it a 0.5 because people could, get into trying to figure out exactly the perfect strategy. And you're drawing cards at the beginning of your turn, so you have less time to really pontificate on each of those items. Theme 0 to 2. I gave that a 1.5. There's a backstory for each of these heroes, why they're pitting themselves against each other. 0 to 2. I gave that a 1.5. I think, again, once you understand the finesse of each of the heroes in each of the decks, you can really get into it. The thing that really kind of limited it, though, is the fact that these were pre-composed decks. We didn't make them. I think there's intent in that, is what I kind of read in the rule book, but having a pre-made deck for you to use kind of takes away from some of that, just because you don't understand the finesse of each of the cards. And was it fun? 1 to 2, I give it a 1.5. I thought it was pretty cool. I would play it again. You'd have to find the right people to play. Obviously, Magic / Yu-Gi-Oh players would probably like it, but each of them are kind of in their own niche already, so it would be tough to lure them away from those two games. But I think there's definitely a market for it. So that said, I gave it a 7.5. I liked it. What do you think, Brent?
Like Sean said, this has been an interesting game. I come from a long history of Magic, and I am a big fan of collectible card games, but then just card duel games in general. I feel this is a lot more along the lines of, say, a Summoner Wars than it is along the lines of Magic the Gathering, just in the sense of the pre-constructed decks with slight modification ability and the template that you're playing on. But it is a game that it is intriguing. It has a lot of potential aspects that the more you play, the more you can unlock and you can build upon, which is the thing I love about a lot of those card games. So let's jump into my rubric. Starting off with the visuals, I gave it 1.5 out of 2. As Sean mentioned, the art was fantastic. The playmats, especially, I found very cool. I imagine as more and more of the hero cards are created, you could have different playmats for the different heroes, which would be kind of cool. And they're just something that, a lot of people that enjoy this genre would enjoy this art style, which I think is great. However, some of the card layout I wasn't such a fan of. At one point I was looking through the cards and I thought there was a bleed error in the print registry, and then I realized that it was designed with this random white line on it. And I assumed that was drawn off in the art, and I'm like, oh no, that's supposed to be there. Not sure how I feel about that. But other than that, I thought it looked very clean, it looked very polished. And I mean, the art is stuff that you would see at cons at the artist hall. It's very fantastic. Skill luck, I gave that 0.5 out of 1. A lot of these games, you have to develop the skill as you play, and a vast majority of the skill in these games comes in the deck construction. And in this set, we're playing with the pre-constructed decks, and so the skill is learning your deck. Having played this before, I kind of knew the decks, so I knew what I wanted to do and what I was going for, but I didn't get that skill of building my own deck that I enjoy so much. And there was a lot of luck with the hero leveling. I drew a level 3 of my hero, a level 3 Vom on my first draw, and so I had a card that I drew that I could not play. To play it, I had to get a level 1 Vom, and I had to level him to level 2 before I could play the level 3 that was stuck in my hand. I would almost think the leveled up characters could be off in a separate deck, and then as you level it, you get to play it. Because otherwise it's just a wasted card in your hand, which is especially frustrating. Because you're thinking of all the cards that you could be using, but you can't because you're holding this wasted card. The pacing, I'm giving that 1.25 out of 2. I thought it was paced decently. The more you get to know your deck, the quicker you can play. I also like to play quickly in most card games. I found that's an aspect of strategy because it can start to fluster the other player as well. So I like to play quickly. Other players don't play as quickly, which can be slightly frustrating. But the more you know the deck, the quicker you can play. But when you're first teaching someone, you will have a lot of analysis paralysis, as they have to read all the cards and figure out what the card works and how it relates to the other cards. But the more you play, the quicker the games will go. theme and immersion, I give that 1 out of 2. As Sean had mentioned, there is a deep theme behind this game and the heroes and the characters in the game, but the theme isn't evident as you play the game. So it's there, but it's not as appreciated as it could be. Mechanics, I give mechanics a 0.75 out of 1. I really liked how a lot of the mechanics worked. The limiting of 1 spell per turn is an interesting way to get around energy, mana, and some of the other aspects the cards use to limit what you can and can't play. The first time I played this, I played it wrong, and I thought you could summon as many creatures as you wanted, and that ended up just being chaotic. Interesting, but chaotic. So that limit is a key aspect of the game, which was intriguing when you're holding a few characters and you have to decide which one do I want to summon. Can I use one to get a special summon on another character? Which was just a fun aspect of the strategy, but at the same time it could be frustrating when it's like, I'm going to lose because I can only play one of these creatures. And if you top deck a hand full of creatures, you're stuck playing 1 card a turn unless you start drawing spells. But that's just an aspect of card games that you will always have. And then was it fun? I gave that 1.5 out of 2. I did enjoy it. I wouldn't say I would play this over Magic, but I do think that it is an enjoyable game for what it is, and I could see people enjoying this greatly in between games of Magic or in between Summoner Wars, or if they just want to have a game night where they're playing a bunch of different card games. This definitely, I think, falls in line on the same level as a lot of those. So all in all, I gave it a 6.5 out of 10, which is fairly good for what it is. Eric, what are your thoughts?
I mean, this is really the first time I played it correctly.
That's a fair
I'd say I wouldn't give it a rating at this point, so.
All right, so 6.5, 7.5, 7.
No.
Easy
7
peasy.
and a results are inconclusive.
Send me a free copy and I'll look.
There you go. All right.
So this has been Gamers Remorse Legacy, the card game edition.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.